Year 7, it's Friday and this is your Friday video lesson. You are going to look at 3 tasks relating to Lady Macbeth and her reaction to receiving a letter from her husband. She gives a well-known soliloquy later on, but do you remember what a soliloquy is from last term? Pause the video if you need more time. A soliloquy is a solo speech. That's to say, speech given on stage by a character when only that character is on stage, allowing the audience to share their thoughts. Don John, you may remember last term, gave a soliloquy. Do you remember what he said and what impression his words gave you? Well, you may remember, said that he would rather be a canker or a poisonous weed in a bush rather than a rose. So he'd rather be a bad influence on the world than a gentlemanly, handsome, elegant person who moves in polite society. Today, you're going to learn the theme of equivocation and experience it for the first time in Macbeth. What is equivocation? Well, it's the word equus plus vocare, equal plus to call, or the use of deceptive language to conceal the truth. So, with that in mind, let's go back to 2 questions here. How does equivocation help somebody planning something disastrous? So, if you're planning on creating mischief, how would equivocation help you? Pause the video if you need more time. Well, it would allow you to disguise your thoughts by saying words that sound benign, they sound safe, but really have a deeper meaning. And bear that in mind, why do you think the gunpowder plotters used equivocation? So when they met at the pub on the Strand, what was it called, the Dog and Duck, or the Lion and Lobster, or the Bomb and Fuse? Anyway, they met in a pub to talk about the plot. They used equivocation, but why? Well, it helped them, again, disguise their plans. So when they said Parliament's going to receive a blow, it meant explode, rather than a shock of some sort. Today, we're going to evaluate Lady Macbeth's language after a touch of analysis, and you're going to know how she reacts to receiving Lady Macbeth's letter. And we're going to look at her use of language in the scene and evaluate the states of the 2 characters, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. So, let's push on into the scene. A word about women at the time. This relates to the 3 questions I'm going to give you at the end. Now, women had no political power, so you need to know that they were decorative. You need to know that women weren't allowed jobs as such. They looked after the home. They had to be obedient to their husbands. They had no political power. They were expected to be either married or, if not, in the church as a nun. So it's a very patriarchal society, as it's called. It's dominated by men. To go through scene 5, a long scene, we're going to look at it in 2 sections. The first section is when Lady Macbeth is reading a letter, and the words that you need to understand are as follows. Rapt. Macbeth says, "I was rapt or amazed at what the witches told me." And in his letter explains that the king sent me news that I was promoted to the Thane of Cawdor, meaning the witches were correct. But, he says, keep all this news to yourself. Keep this encounter with the witches to yourself, my dear wife. And when she receives that letter, Lady Macbeth becomes excited. She sees promotion, she sees ambition. She says, however, "I feel, Macbeth, you're too kind. Your nature is too kind. You're too full of the milk of human kindness to do something brutal and ambitious. Or, in other words, take the shortest path, the nearest way to becoming king. The shortest path meaning murder." She goes on to say, or to criticize Macbeth for saying that he lacks the illness that should attend these deeds, or you don't have the evil that it takes to do something violent to the king. Then she encourages him to hie thee hither, meaning hurry here, so she can give him a scolding talk, or chastise Macbeth with the valour of her conversation, give him an improving talk. So she is the bossy one. And she remarks at how Macbeth has had metaphysical help or supernatural help from the women. Now she's going to be the help to make it reality. So, a couple of points about her language. She says, Glamis thou art a corridor, and shalt be what thou art promised. What does this tell us about Lady Macbeth's ambition? Have a think to yourself. I agree, she is rather ambitious. And we've discussed this other quotation. I fear you're too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. She sees her husband as too frail, too feeble, weak. I'm going to give you the 3 questions now before we go any further into the scene. They're right at the end of the slides. So the first task is to find 3 quotations that best show Lady Macbeth's character, and a little note beside each. What impression does each quotation give you of her? We've talked about her being ambitious and so on. And secondly, who has the most power and status in the act or in the scene, and why is this surprising for an audience? Let's look at the scene where Lady Macbeth responds to news that the king is on his way to her castle. She says that the raven, a bird associated with bad luck, has a sore throat because it's been screeching so much. This is a bad omen or a sign that some evil is coming. Then she asks to have her femininity removed by spirits. Unsex me, spirits, she says. Make me more aggressive. She then says, stop up the access. Stop up the access of remorse, which means give me a lack of guilty feelings. Compunctions meaning guilty. Let my gall be the milk to evil. So evil should drink from me. I should be so evil I can feed evil spirits, evil ministries, and turn my soul a dark colour, or dun it the dunnest colour, the dunnest smoke of hell wrap me up, I think she said. And later on, when Macbeth arrives, she says, to beguile the time, look like the time, which means to deceive people, look like other people look. And then later on, we will have sway and masterdom, or royalty and status. The king, she says, using equivocation, must be provided for. Care must be taken of him. What do you think she means by care must be taken of him? Look after him as a guest, or make sure that he doesn't leave the castle alive? Well, she means both, really, but to Macbeth it means the latter. Have a look at this video summary I made earlier today, and we'll talk on the other side.
Students, greetings and welcome back to the Heath. This is Macbeth Act 1, Scene 5. I'm going to summarise briefly this long scene. You'll remember that Macbeth has been commended in battle. Then he's been promoted to Thane of Cawdor by the king. You'll also remember that he runs into 3 witches, or he encounters 3 witches with Banquo. And they inform him that eventually he's going to be promoted to Thane of Cawdor and then king. And then you also remember the king made that prophecy come true by giving him said promotion. Now, what does Macbeth do after that? He leaps onto his horse and races to his wife at Inverness Castle. King Duncan is following on horseback, a slightly slower horse, because he is a guest of Macbeth this evening, and he's going to be attending him and Lady Macbeth. at dinner. So, meanwhile, Lady Macbeth is reading a letter from Macbeth, and the scene opens with Lady Macbeth reading the letter that you have been sent, and the letter reads as follows. They met me in the day of success, and I've learned by the perfect test report they have more in them, this means the witches, they have more in them than mortal knowledge. When I burned in desire to question them further, they made themselves air, so they vanished, into which they vanished. Whilst I stood rapt, which means amazed in wonder, came missives, a message from the king, who all hailed me Thane of Cawdor, by which title before these weird sisters saluted me. So just as promised, I was promoted to Thane of Cawdor, and referred me to the coming on of time with hail, king that shall be. This I have thought good to deliver thee, my dearest partner of greatness, that thou mightst not lose the dues of rejoicing. So what does Lady Macbeth, what does she have to celebrate? Well, she's a woman in Jacobean England, which means that she's either expected to marry or become a nun. She has no political power of her own, so she isn't allowed to really have a job. So if Macbeth is promoted to king, she leaps up the social ladder, up that great chain of being to become a queen. So let me take you now to Inverness Castle and show you how Lady Macbeth responds to that letter. By the power of technology, we are able to arrive at Inverness Castle. There on the battlements is Lady Macbeth, reading her husband's letter. In response, she turns to the sky and says, the raven is hoarse. Now, ravens were superstitiously known as birds associated with death or bad luck. So she hears a raven and says, the raven himself is hoarse, which croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. So Lady Macbeth is expecting Duncan, and she's already starting to think about taking a shortcut or the nearest path to becoming king. Why wait for the promotion? Why wait for fate to promote Macbeth when she could perhaps engineer an accident? She asks spirits to unsex her, which means to give her masculine aggression, masculine strength, and remove those feminine graces of delicacy and obedience. Make her manly, make her aggressive. Interestingly, she's also asking spirits for this advice, which suggests that she's involving witchcraft. So meanwhile, Macbeth arrives. He is approaching the gatehouse, fresh from his horse journey, and he encounters his wife, who says, I think, Macbeth, you should take the nearest path to becoming king. It's good news, but I think you can be a little more aggressive, and you should look like a flower, but be the serpent underneath it. Don't be cowardly. We can do this. We can engineer a promotion. We don't have to wait for the witch's prophecy to come true. We can make it come true. And Macbeth simply turns away and says, We'll talk about this later, I think. That is Act 1, Scene 5.
Year 7, please read that scene. It's a long scene, but there's plenty of key language and plenty of summary to help you. And once more, those 3 questions. Find 3 quotations that best show Lady Macbeth's character. Think of that ambition, think of that demonic attitude, think of conjuring the spirits, think of that manliness. What impression does each quotation give you of her? Second question, who has the most power and status in Act 1, Scene 5? Probably answer that now. And why is this surprising for an audience? Good luck with those questions and have a good weekend.